Dear Minister of Education, Science and Sports, ambassadors, headmasters, teachers, guests, and all of you watching us via YouTube. Welcome to the conference NORTED. This conference, which is organized by Nordic Council of Ministers' Office, Nordic Country Embassies, and Lithuania National Agency for Education, thematic of this year, which was proposed by the minister, will be inclusion in education. Very important topic around the world, Europe, especially in post-COVID era. At this conference, we will hear about lessons and best practices from Finland and Denmark. We will also be hearing about Lithuanian upcoming reforms in inclusive education. Without further ado, greeting words from Ambassador of Finland to Lithuania, Her Excellency Arja Makūnen. Ambassador.
I cannot see you very clearly, but I think you are there. So good morning to everybody. Okay, here we go. So my name is Arja Makūnen, Ambassador of Finland to Lithuania. And it's very nice to see you all here on behalf of the Embassy of Finland and welcome you to this third conference of NORTED, this time to inclusive education. It is a great pleasure to be here today. Firstly, I would like to express my special personal thank you to the Minister of Education, Science and Sports, Jurgita Sukjidiene, and her team for active participation to the NORTED project. I'm sorry about my laughing, but I tried to learn this surname and pronounce it correctly, but I think I never get it right. The idea of inclusive education seminar came directly from the minister. We appreciate your support to our project. I would also like to thank you, Lithuanian partner, National Education Agency of Lithuania, which has supported us in organizing the event and which is offering the premises, very nice premises, and technical and practical support to us. I would also like to thank Norden, which has contributed a lot to the success of the event, as well as the other Nordic countries and embassies for being partners in our NORTED project. Of course, we welcome our speakers today from Finland and Denmark. I think this time you were the only foreign speakers. And I think it'll be a very fruitful discussion between your experiences in Finland and Denmark and also here in Lithuania. I would also like to welcome all the school principals from Lithuania to our event, be it live or online. A school principal's role has always been very demanding. You give guidance and support to the teachers. You give directions to your work community. You create working culture and give motivation to teachers. Not an easy task. So I hope that this day gives you some inspiration of some aspects of your work. Teachers are the backbone of the education system. In Finland, teaching is a respected profession and many young people want to become teachers. We appreciate that you have taken time to participate in our event and learn more about inclusive education in Finland and Denmark. For our part, we are eager to learn more about the present and also about the future of the inclusive education in Lithuania. I don't go further to NORTED project this time because we have also here representative of Nornen here. But I think that this project has been a really useful one, and we are happy about the attendance and the number of listeners and participants to our conference. So I would like to welcome you all once more, and I hope that you enjoyed the contents of this day. Thank you.
Kiitos Panlian Ambassador. Thank you for your speech. Let's hope that all of us going to learn more about inclusion and better education. To my knowledge, our that motto is together for better education. So thank you again for your speech, and let's welcome Nordic Council of Ministers Office Director Ms. Helen Nilsson. Stage is yours.
And I'm not from Finnish National Agency for Education. But, dear Ambassador, dear education experts, on behalf of the Nordic Council of Ministers Office in Lithuania, it's a pleasure for me to participate at the Welcome to the NordEd Conference on Inclusive Education. This conference is already the third. I can steer this almost. This conference is already the third event from NordEd initiative, which aim to enhance Nordic-Baltic cooperation in the field of education by facilitating debate among policymakers, education experts, and broader society on relevant education topics, providing best practices of education from our region, the Nordic-Baltic. NordEd initiative is supported by Nordic Council of Ministers and implemented by the Nordic Council of Ministers Office here in Lithuania, and as you heard before, together with the embassies of Finland, Denmark, Norway, Sweden in Lithuania, and the Embassy of Iceland in Finland. First NordEd conference last autumn was focusing on equality education in the Nordic-Baltic region, teachers selection, motivation and training, as well as innovation in the field of education. Second conference in spring 2022 this year was all about psychosocial school environment, bullying prevention and vocational training. To transform all this into numbers, that means a full week of knowledge, including 24 presentations, 8 panel discussion, and 50 speakers from the Nordic-Baltic region. Number speaks for itself, and I will allow myself to say that NordEd series is probably the biggest event so far on Nordic education in Lithuania, and we are very proud of bringing Nordic-Baltic education know-how closer together. And as was mentioned, the motto is together for better education. However, sharing knowledge is important, but it's only the first step, and of course will not solve education problems in the region. Though we encourage all parties involved to benefit from this forum with concrete actions using good ideas in policy implementation at all levels. By ending my speech, I would like to use this opportunity to thank all partners, Finland and all the other Nordic embassies, the Lithuanian Ministry of Education, Science and Sport, and the minister herself, the Lithuanian National Agency for Education. Without your collaboration, it would be impossible to achieve these results. We are open for new ideas and hope for future cooperation, believing NordEd series should continue. It would be interesting to get your feedback and possible areas of interest. By the way, All the records of the three conference, the two previous and this conference, you will be able to find at norded.l website. I wish you all an interesting and valuable conference. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Director, for your speech. Let's hope the collaboration will continue. And after the welcoming speeches, we're going to start with the opening lecture from Dr. Katri Kukka, Counselor of Education in Finnish National Agency for Education, and her lecture will be how inclusive education and special education is implemented in Finland. Doctor, the stage is yours. I'm sorry. Second. Doctor is getting ready, and thank you.
Labas vitas. Hyvää huomenta. Good morning. I made it somehow. Nice to see you all. And you have seen, unfortunately, not half of my presentation, only these 2 slides, but anyhow. My title is Implementing Inclusive Education and Special Education in Finland. I'll start with special education and try to go quickly through this framework, what we have. So I work in National Agency for Education and also send greetings from my colleague Pirjo Koivula, who was the one who should have been here instead of me, but she's starting to move on to these lazy, hazy days of pensionate and so on. So I'll try to cover her expertise. And my main task in National Agency is to take care of this cultural and linguistic diversity issues, meaning pupils and students from migrant background. And they are more or less kind of indicators how well we take care of them and their needs. It also sort of reflects how well functioning our system is regarding inclusive education and also special education. Just few words about this historical background. We all know when we speak about inclusion, we know the Salamanca Declaration from last century, as many things seem to be nowadays. And that also sort of influenced in our educational legislation. And we mentioned, for example, in our new, though at that time new legislation, this principle of a neighborhood school and inclusive ideas, but not mentioning the very concept of inclusion in our legislation. Then we moved on to long-term strategy for special needs education, which also had this inclusive approach, even though we arranged and still arrange special education in special classes and so on. And our last and current basic education, the core curriculum, that states that our basic education will be developed in accordance with the principle of inclusion. What does it mean? That we don't say, but we sort of formulate it in another way. At the moment, and that is one reason why I am standing here, is that we have the Prime Minister Marin's government program, which also includes a Right to Learn program, which aims at developing quality and equality in early childhood education and care and primary and lower secondary education. And this program started in 2020 and finishes this year. And I've been working in this working group, which has been preparing measures to promote support for learning and inclusion in early childhood education, pre-primary education, primary and lower secondary education. That has been a very innovative and also a little bit contradictory group, because there are many interests and many interest groups and many owners for inclusion, as you may be aware in your context as well. And the final report, where I have been also working as one of these secretaries, is that we are going to give recommendations in few weeks. So one thing I can reveal at the moment is that we are trying to give more explicit definition of inclusion in Finnish context, and maybe put that also more clearly into the legislation. So some words only. You'll get all these slides and information, so I won't go in details into these issues I have put here. But the basic idea, even if it's inclusive education or special education, is the idea of equality and equity, and minimizing low achievement and helping every pupil, every learner to succeed. And no child left behind, that kind of slogan also suits us. And that has been one of these explanation of our good PISA results, which aren't that good anymore, as we all know. But anyhow, that is the fundamental principle. And how do we do that is that we try to maintain these principles by building on early intervention and support. It is said that we have to sort of answer to pupils' needs whenever we notice that there is a need. And this issue of pupils' welfare with good learning, they go together, and we try to take care of also that combination and use a cross-administrative and multi-professional approach. And the last change we have made is to make these better, is this best interests of the child. It has been put now very clearly into our legislation and also our core curricula in different stages. So that is the basis. And I think whenever we try to make some changes in our mindset, in our orientation towards inclusion, we have to think about the values and the ethics of education. I think we all agree with that. So then the support system we have at the moment, that may also be very familiar to you. So we have levels of or tiers of system, general support, intensified support, and special support. And then we have different support forms, which I go through very quickly. And these forms can be used in each of these levels, but a pupil or a student can be at one level at a time. So if he or she gets general support, he or she cannot receive special support, and so forth. And the forms are maybe also very familiar to you: remedial teaching, part-time special needs education, and these very important interpretation and assistance services and special aids. And all these, when considering how to use them with a particular pupil, they must be flexible, and they should be planned jointly together with different actors in school and also with parents. That is very vital. And when I'm speaking about parents, I always think about second language learners' parents, how to put all these concepts and practices understandable with them, so they know where and how their children go. Speaking again about the best interests of the child. So remedial teaching can be seen as a form of differentiation, and it also should be organized with the parents, or normally it is the class or subject teacher, in our case, who gives this remedial teaching. And it is given normally when a pupil has temporary learning difficulties in maths or some other subjects. And it should be given during the lessons with a school assistant or out of lessons, also with a teacher. And then this part-time special needs education, we have had researches, studies on it, that pupil who has minor difficulties or in learning or adjustment and needs support to overcome them, but not for a long time. When this part-time special needs education has been arranged, they have reduced the stigma associated with special needs education and instead promoted more inclusive way of education. And this form can be also or have been seen as a contribution to all students' good performance. And then these shortly about these assistant services, interpretation and special aids, they should be organized. If a pupil have hearing impairment or specific language impairment and so on. And then a person, the assistant, that is very important as well. And normally when we hire or when school hires this assistant, it is not only for one pupil, in some cases of course, but it also helps all the children. And the need for special aids may be at the moment these information technology applications, audiobooks and so forth. So these are the forms of support. And then when we go back to that figure of these levels of support, so first is the general support, which should be offered in an early stage as a part of daily school life. And that is, according to the law, it should be provided as soon as the need arises. And no specific evaluations or decisions, which comes later in intensified and special needs, they are not required at this stage. And of course, once again, cooperation between school and parent, cooperation inside the school. And at this stage, I also want to say, because you are more or less all heads, head teachers, principals, you carry a burden which is called power. It is your task, pleasure, joy, duty to organize your school and the school culture that way that this cooperation, these arrangements, this structure becomes an everyday life. And that is so vital. I'm that old that I can say it to you that whenever we have some kind of change in education, and no matter how sort of bright-sighted teachers and other stuff we have, if they don't have the mandate from you, so then nothing permanent good will happen because they are too alone. So I hope you join me in that kind of thinking, that we work together, we walk together, and because you are in that position that you are able to give the right to teachers for cooperation and developing. So that's very essential. I could talk about that for the rest of my speech or life or whatever. So in this general support, this planning is very essential. What changes, solutions, what are needed, how to proceed, when does this general support end, at which stage, and what kind of results do we want to have? Of course, it is important to find the causes of the challenges pupil have. We may use tests, statements, discussions with parents and other professionals. So that is very important, and each and every teacher should think about or become familiar with this idea of planning beforehand and doing cooperation. Intensified support is meant for pupil who needs regular support, so it's not this kind of temporary, and this is organized on a basis of pedagogical assessment. So before you sort of move a pupil to intensified support, you must do this kind of pedagogical assessment, which consists of various dimensions. And then you have to make a learning plan for that child. And also, once again, this pupil welfare and well-being is essential in this level. And this pedagogical assessment, it must be written in a written form, and it should include the sort of description of the overall situation, and together with the guardian, it should be sort of described. And also what is important is not only to look at the challenges or problems, but the strengths and interests. So how doing what could sort of enhance the learning capability. So we go further then to special support, which is the sort of last stage on a top. And that is provided for pupils who cannot adequately achieve their growth, development, or learning objectives through other support measures which have been used before. And with this stage, a school must make a written decision. This primary teaching group, possible interpretation and assistance services, other services, exceptional teaching arrangements if needed, for example, an individualized learning plan in some subjects. And then each and every child who is in that special support phase or level, they should have this individual education plan. And here are the content of the pedagogical statement. And it is a kind of a very strong document in that sense that in Finland, many parents, or at least some parents, are very aware of their rights and what should be done and how it should be done and so on. So these decisions and statements should be very carefully done. And this includes this sort of progress, what have been done so far. And also, for example, assessment of the pupil's requirement of special support, and what I mentioned earlier, this whether the pupil needs an individualized syllabus in one or several subjects. And that means, of course, that less aims, less contents, concentrating on the very core of a syllabus or these themes. So I have mentioned several times this pupil welfare system also as a part of supporting pupil. So it is divided in Finland between communal pupil welfare and individual pupil welfare. And this communal pupil welfare, that is a kind of part of school culture, so to say, and everyone, every teacher, head teacher, other school staff can be the one who provides this pupil welfare. And then if a particular pupil needs individual pupil welfare, so then these, for example, school psychologists and school social worker, then he or she is given them. But that is the division, communal and individual. Then some statistics, they are always boring or interesting. You suit yourself. So you can see the year 2011, that was the year when these changes regarding this three-tiered system, which I just introduced, they came into force. So then these intensified support started, and it has increased. Is it good or bad? It is the fact that it has become the solution, not totally instead of special education, but a good sort of option for that, because that is also a way of, or a sort of manifestation of inclusive education, because this intensified education should happen not in separate group, but inside the mainstream class. But these are the last results. And then there is this statistics of how they have received those pupils who are in this intensified or special support level, what they have received last year. So there is this mentioned part-time special education, a lot of it, and then remedial teaching, special needs assistance. Unfortunately, I cannot tell which color is intensified or support, special support, but I will correct this when I share these slides to you. And then these teaching arrangements, and this is interesting, I hope, because special education needs pupils, those who have been who have got this individual education plan and maybe individualized study plans. So 35% of them were in mainstream group, and that can be seen as a inclusive way of arranging their teaching. But on the other hand, for 34% in segregated settings, special school or special group inside the mainstream school. So let's see what happens next year. And 12%, there is this percentage, how much time of their schooling they will study in mainstream group and so on. But that is one statistics, and in 2019, researcher Meri Lintuvuori did a survey, a study of these official statistics and norms we have, and the results are here. And the main result is that the provision of learning and schooling support, they differed between the municipalities in Finland, and support provisions which were based on local support system traditions developed over time. So this kind of change into more inclusive education, that is challenging, so to say. And for example, this the second dot, intensified support, this should be provided along with mainstream education, like I said, using flexible teaching arrangements. But because it's not recorded in statistics, it is hard to find out where is it arranged. But this data indicated somehow that anyhow, that in some schools they studied these pupils in small group settings, not in mainstream. So the researcher suggests that these arrangements should be further examined. And that will happen actually because one of the recommendations we are going to give in that report is that we must do a kind of a full investigation what is happening regarding special education and inclusive education in Finland. And that will be, let's see what our next government will then decide. But anyhow, I think we have a good path to go according to this legislative and normative framework. But still, what I said earlier, it is about the mindset. And I hope I have some time to speak about this inclusive education. These are heavy statements. I don't know if you agree. Inclusion is a value. It is not an experiment that can be easily forgotten about. It is not a saving instrument. And it cannot be blamed if the school is not working. And this last sentence is a reality in our case, because just last week there was also one heavy discussion in our media that is inclusion working, and teachers are getting tired, and schools don't have enough resources, and so on and so forth. But there were also these other voices, teachers from the field, who explained that yes, it is really working by doing this and that. And let's see what is to be done, what needs to be done. When we did our interim report and also this final report in the working group I mentioned, we defined inclusive education in a wider approach, not only putting special needs pupils into mainstream education or some other pupils with learning difficulties, but like I said in the one slide, that inclusion is a value, and that means education for all students. No one is excluded. The need for support does not determine the place of study. So the support must come to the child, not so that the child must go to some other place to get the support. So it needs, I don't know how cliche that may sound in your ears, but I think this needs a mind change in each and every person's mindset who works in school. Einsko, one researcher, speaks about this inclusive orientation, and that is somehow similar in my mind, that this kind of change in mindset. So we really have to start to think, who are the learners we are teaching, and what is the variety today? Because, well, 2 words of my dear sister, she has been working as a special education for decades, and done a lot both within integrative education and also inclusive education. And with her, I always speak that who are those who will be sort of staying in normal mainstream class? If we think that you should go away and you should have special education and you go there and you need that and you don't have enough Finnish language skill, you go there. Who are the ones who stay, and how long does it take that we start to know that, well, actually you may need this and you may need that? I hope you get what I tried to say. It could be more easy to explain in Finnish, but anyhow, so we need to see the situation that these are the students we have to teach, we want to teach, and we are lucky to teach. And then what I see in this changing your mindset is that I'm a professional. How can I say that? Well, I don't have special education skills, help me. We should have them. We should sort of study them. We should give the opportunities to teachers to study these skills. I once again hope that you understand my point, or will understand my point, that it is not about this sort of complaining, oh, these are so difficult, I don't have any means, but it is the challenge to sort of reflect yourself and your skills as a teacher, your ethics, your values, your professional skills. This may sound, and it is very sort of high, but what else can we be? We must go high because we are teachers and educators. So what one researcher group in Finland suggested, it is the last statement here, what I also tried to explain just recently, that it is inclusion as it should be seen also, and will be seen hopefully in Finland more and more, also after the report and these some changes we may have in our legislation, that it is developing this ordinary, normal, mainstream teaching, fostering classroom and school community, and embedding these pedagogical approaches that benefit all pupils in everyday life. So of course we need special educators and the ones who have special knowledge, but developing this inclusive approach in the normal teacher training, that is the point, I think. So because the competence is the cornerstone, so it should be more integral part of the pre-service training of future teachers. The challenge which is mentioned here, maybe probably the same as in Lithuania, is that these universities or institutions which offer teacher training, they are very independent and autonomous. And they can say that, well, that is included, that is embedded already in our study plan or whatever. And yet we know that compared to these complaints and these challenges, in reality, it should be there more. And other challenge in our case is that all this in-service training for teachers is voluntary. It is not mandatory. And that is one thing I would like to see change. If you are a doctor, that is a typical example, is it so that you should sort of update your skills and competencies every now and then? Of course, many teachers and schools do that, and that is also a question of leadership, but not everyone. So we offer possibilities for develop inclusive education amongst teachers and schools, but that is too, in my opinion, too sort of vague in that sense, that we should force somehow to do that more. And the sugar in the bottom, how to make successful inclusion happen. And that I can give to you because that is happening in Finland, luckily. Not in all schools, not in all municipalities, but it is happening. So well-functioning learning environment, that doesn't mean that they should be, some pupils should be put in a separate place, but the classroom, the learning environment should be that it offers own zones where the pupil can feel safe. It offers the means and possibilities for differentiation, because differentiation is essential in inclusive education. that is one challenge in Finland. I don't know. How many of you have been to Finland? To school in Finland? Yeah, you know the new schools were with open spaces and these wow architectural buildings. But are they good for learning in inclusive way? Partially, but partially not. And then the other thing is what I have also referred to earlier, this flexible co-teaching, special teacher, class teacher, subject teacher, who can this joint co-teaching can give support in small group if needed and in bigger group if needed. And this requires equality between the teachers and joint planning. And once again, head teachers are the masters who can give the possibility to organize the school work so that there is time and space for joint planning. And differentiation, which I already mentioned, and that needs pre-planning, that needs the knowledge of each and every pupil. And that is very important, that you know your students and their strengths and the challenges. And for that, you should also have time to get to know the pupils. So differentiation includes, as you well know, adaptation of teaching materials, allocating the tasks that you should do this, you do that. Oh, you need help. So then you know what to do. I'll go to help you. And then the classroom management, how to not put order, but how to make that kind of atmosphere and information and everyone can work. So how many of your teachers explain the progression of the lesson every time? You should ask them. How many explains the key concepts, what we are doing in history today, what we are doing in mathematics? Do you know the concept of integration, in the integral, whatever? Do you know the concept of society and so on, if you are especially a second language learner? So that should be important. It takes time, but if it becomes a routine, then it's easier. And then we are speaking about language aware learning, which language awareness is my middle name, more or less. Ask, you will know. So each teacher is the teacher of the language of the subject he or she teaches. I hope you agree. And this methodology of genre pedagogy, reading to learn, some of you may be very familiar with these. They are sort of good tools to use. And reviewing the school culture. Do we have enough resources, time and space for cooperation, joint planning? Do we have shared awareness what inclusion means? Are we all committed? Are we included in inclusion? You could test that. This European Agency for Development in Special Needs Education has made some time ago this self-review tool supporting inclusive education policy. There are these statements or questions you could easily go through with your staff and sort of get the bigger picture where we stand. And I have also mentioned sometimes these language awareness and second language learners. This European Centre for Modern Languages of the Council of Europe has made, or actually me and three of my colleagues has made this self-evaluation tool, a digital tool which sort of gives you a big picture of the status, how aware you are regarding language, teaching languages of schooling in your school. And that also leads to more inclusive way when you start and continue the thinking that all pupils, all learners should be included the teaching and learning and learning happenings mostly via language. So the language is so essential for that. Now it's the end of my sort of running presentation. Thank you, kiitos, Achu. And don't answer bless you. Okay. Time for we continue.
Continue, I guess. Are there any questions? So great, everybody understood.
Okay.
Kiitos paljon, Dr. Kati. Interesting insights into the Finnish educational system and the progress you made, not as cultural, but also a structural shift. Right now, I would, before our next lecture, I would like to invite Minister for Education, Science and Sports, Dr. Jurgita Šiugždinienė. Okay.
Thank you. Ačiū. Kitos. I actually have a lot of questions, but I will ask them later. So thank you very much. And first of all, I would like to thank our Nordic colleagues and Nordic Council of Ministers for organizing this event. I remember that approximately 1 year ago, we were discussing, I think, in the Finnish embassy. Yes, and we were discussing that we need to have this discussion because we need to learn from your success stories and from your mistakes. So thank you very much for sharing with us, for organizing this event. And I fully agree with you that inclusiveness is a value, and it demonstrates a value of our society, values of our society, and our attitude towards each person and each child. In Lithuania, we have a huge challenge ahead. In 2024, we need to open up even more wide our school doors to every child. And it's a huge challenge to open the doors, but the challenge is even bigger to open up the minds of the people. And I think that's the biggest challenge. So it should happen a major value shift in the minds of teachers, in the minds of ministerial professionals, in the minds of parents, and in the minds of entire society. So I'm very thankful for this event. I'm very interested myself, and I will have time to listen for, I hope, one more presentation. I'm very sorry for being late. We have parliament seating, and I need to vote as a member of a parliament. So looking forward and wishing all of us a fruitful discussion, open discussion, constructive discussion, and let's not be afraid to ask questions, because every question is okay. And let's ask because we have this opportunity to ask. We will not have more opportunities. Oh, okay, there are always opportunities, but mistakes will cost a lot for all of us. Thanks a lot.
Ačiū, Minister of Education. And right now we're having our next lecture, Chantal Maria Paul Nielsen, who is Chief Consultant at Danish Evaluation Institute. She's going to give us analysis of inclusive learning environments and special education support in Denmark. So, Ms. Chantal, the stage is yours.
For the invitation to come and speak today. And as always, it's very interesting and very inspirational to hear about the experiences in Finland. I learned 2 things this morning from Dr. Katri Kuka, that kuka means flower in Finnish. And I also learned labas rytas means good morning in Lithuanian. I'm going to be telling you some experiences about Danish approaches to inclusive education. And first of all, I'll give you a little outline of what I will be talking about today. I will start with a brief history of how we got to where we are today, where we're trying different new approaches to combining and merging general education and special education in Denmark to meet special education needs. Then the main part of my talk today will be on results from a qualitative analysis of 3 concrete experiences from primary schools in Denmark, where I'll point to the strengths and also some points of attention that I would like to focus on. And then I will conclude with some insights into some current challenges in Denmark as I see them. If we look at the Danish system, you might not know very much about it, but what we can say is that we've sort of made a shift from what we could call like a bipolar pattern of support structure, where we had typically before, if we think about how things were in 2012, we had segregated special education in either special education classes or special education schools, and we had mainstream classes or mainstream schools. And in 2012, it was found that almost 30% of our school budget was being used on segregated special education. And so then that made the Danish government stop up and make a change in legislation and also make an aim of 96% inclusion into mainstream education. And we also experienced a change in the definition of when is it we call something special education. Not very long after this change in legislation, there was a rather large public school reform in 2014. And again, not very long time after that, there was an inspection to look at the inclusion experiences and find out whether things were going as they should be. And in that content, we actually decided not to have this quantitative goal of 96% inclusion. And we also started to question what is it we talk about when we talk about students that are included? Should we call them included students or not? Here we are in 2022, and what we're seeing is a lot of different kinds of approaches to special education. The organizational forms are new. And what the schools are trying to do is to try and find the balance between accommodating individual needs on the one hand and the need to create inclusive learning environments on the other. And this is 3 examples of what that could look like I'm going to give you today. There is a Danish term for these new approaches, which is called mellemformer, which is like an intermediate form. And there is no English concept of it. And I think there's a good reason for that, because what it is, it's a kind of merge or a mix between aspects of mainstream education and aspects of special education. And we're trying to combine aspects of that to address the needs of special education in a better way. And as Dr. Katri was talking about, it's a lot about ideals and values and ethics. But it's also in a matter of learning outcomes. We have some Danish studies from a research institute called VIVE, who has looked at learning outcomes for children who are in many aspects comparative with each other. And there is a difference whether you are included and receive instruction in a mainstream setting or you receive instruction in a special education segregated setting. And we do see evidence from different angles that say that students do actually perform better academically when they're in an included learning environment in mainstream. And they also have less, well, we see that there is no negative implications for their well-being. They don't change school more often. They don't have more absence, for example. And then whenever we talk about inclusion, we also have to be very aware of costs and the fact that it requires special resources. It requires also more resources. And we have to talk about which competencies and where should these competencies be placed. The main part of my talk today is sharing insights with you from 3 primary schools. It is a qualitative analysis that I would like to share with you today. The aim of the study that was conducted in 2021, last year, was to obtain empirically founded knowledge about how do these schools work with creating these inclusive learning environments? And what are the experiences? How is it actually to be a teacher, a pedagogue, a school principal, a student, and a parent in these kind of learning environments? And what we've tried to do is to highlight the potentials, but also look at the limitations of these new approaches to inclusive learning that these different organizational forms have. When we conducted the qualitative study, we chose 3 different case schools, and we didn't have the explicit aim of finding like best practice. What we wanted to find was to find practice that could be inspiring and hopefully could be relevant for Danish schools, but hopefully that you in Lithuania can also pick up some ideas that you can work with to make it your own. We had a number of selection criteria. First of all, SEN and non-SEN students should receive instruction together at more or less, not necessarily all of the time, but at least some of the time. Another selection criteria was that we should have both general education staff and special education staff participating actively in classroom instruction. And from the understanding of the Danish concept is that in ordinary classes, you typically have a teacher with a teacher education background. But in these 3 cases that we're seeing here, which are the new approaches, we've seen that there's a teacher with a teacher with a general education background, and then we have a pedagogue with special education background, either formally from an education or through experience. So this is a bit of a difference compared to what we usually see in Denmark. But this was one of the criteria that we wanted to look at here. And the third criteria was that we wanted to look at schools that had this new approach to organizing inclusive education as a permanent organizational form. We didn't want to just look at something temporary that would work for like 6 months or something. We wanted it to be a permanent organization. And then we were interested in that across these 3 different schools, we wanted to see some kind of variation in the type of SEN students that the organization was actually intended for. And I'll give some examples of what this means. As I said, this is a qualitative study, so the type of data that we have in this study is based on case visits. We visited 8 different classes in the primary school, and we did observations in 2 consecutive days in each of the class with 2 consultants in each. And we conducted interviews with 37 students, both SEN and non-SEN students, and their parents. And before our visit, we had interviews with 5 teachers and 5 pedagogues, which we then followed up with interviews after the observation and interviews with the students. And of course, we also talked with the school leaders, each of the schools. The 3 organizational forms that I'm going to present to you today, first of all, let me just give you an overview, and then I'll go into detail with each of them, because it's quite important to understand the results, to understand the differences. We've given them names that are pseudonyms just to preserve their anonymity, but also because the names that we have chosen says something about the content and the approach to inclusion. So we have the nest, the sluice, and the enclosure. And I'll describe each of them in detail. If we start with the nest, this is an approach to inclusion that is inspired from New York. The 2nd largest city in Denmark, Aarhus, has been working with this nest model for a number of years and has quite good results. The whole idea is that it's a rather small class. There are only 16 students in each class, of which 4 of them are students with autism spectrum disorders. And the remaining 12 students are just ordinary students, of which some of them, as I've indicated here with the light blue color, can have some other challenges. And for each of this class, there's a teacher with general education background, and then there's also a pedagogue with special education background. And the whole idea is that the approach to teaching is geared towards children with autism. So that means there's a very structured approach. There's a lot of importance placed in that it has to be recognizable for the students, using a lot of pictograms, etc. And the whole idea is that what's good for children with autism is also good for the other children. The sluice, I'm not sure whether all of you understand the concept or know the concept of the sluice, but it's like when you have a river and you want to control the water, you put like a gate. It can be made out of wood, or it can be made out of metal to level out the water level. And so the idea here is that we have a special education class and we have a general education class, which we call the anchor class, the general class. And the whole idea is that in the special class, it's for children with general learning disabilities. Each of them have like an individual school schedule for the week. And so some of their lessons are taught in the anchor class, but other of the lessons are taught in the special education class. And the whole idea is that it's an individual schedule. So the teacher continuously focuses on, well, is this, for this individual child, is it good to have 2 lessons of maths every day in the anchor class, and perhaps also physical education, or it can be other specialized classes. And the whole idea with the sluice is that it also goes the other way. So there can be students in the anchor class who perhaps temporarily need some more special attention. They could have some trouble with reading or with maths, or they could have some problems at home, some social issues, which for some reason they need a more protected or more quiet environment for a while. So then in that case, that child would get an individual schedule for a period of time and be able to have a more quiet and more secluded focus in the special education class. Here, the idea is, it can be difficult in practice, but the idea is that the pedagogue in the special class, who's the main pedagogue, and the teacher in the anchor class, that they also have teaching lessons of each other's classes. So the idea is that the staff actually gets knowledge of the whole group of children. The third organizational form that we've visited is called the enclosure. So it's rather large, but also enclosed. This is quite a non-typical way of organizing schooling in Denmark. Here we have actually 2 classes that are actually taught together. So when they're all together, it's actually more than 40 students, which in a Danish concept is a lot of students. In this particular case, it was 42 students. And the idea here is that they don't a priori say that it's for specific learning disabilities or autism. Here, the idea is we have the students we have. So some have ADHD, some have anxiety, some have autism, some have general learning disabilities, and quite a lot in this particular case had dyslexia. Actually, 15 of the students had dyslexia. And when these students are together at this level, they are in the Danish language lessons, the English lessons, and the maths lessons. There are 3 adults, so 2 teachers and 1 pedagogue. So this is quite different, but they're not taught all together at the same time in all lessons. They use a lot of small groups, so they have group learning in a way to actually accommodate differentiation. Let me share with you the results of our study and our qualitative analysis. I've tried to group them in 2 main findings. The first main finding is that whatever organizational form you choose, it will define and create the learning environment. First of all, the organizational form has a role to play in terms of which students can actually be accommodated. Who is the target group, basically? And when you've decided on the target group, it actually has an impact on what kind of learning environments are available to which students and what also characterizes them. Let me give you some examples of what I mean here. First of all, if we look at this idea of the nest, which is focusing on students with autism, well, what would the teacher say? Well, it's typically for students with autism and other students that work well with this kind of small environment, rather quiet and easy to help. The idea, the issue or the challenge can be that it's actually quite useful for many students. This is a citation from Casper, who is a psychologist connected to the Nest. He says, many children could benefit from this smaller learning environment with less noise, fewer disturbances, easier access to help from a teacher or pedagogue. The Nest is a good solution for the children who are sensorily challenged and are easily overstimulated. So the point is here that how do you actually decide on the boundaries of the target group? Because his point is that many children would actually benefit from this small environment. But of course, in practice, it's very difficult because having classes of only 16 students and a pedagogue and a teacher is quite expensive. The second consideration in terms of the target group is that children develop over time, of course. And the sluice is made for that kind of development over the time. Here it's a consultant with a teacher of education background, Ahmed. He says, the sluice makes it possible for completely ordinary children who, for example, because of problems at home, can receive extra help for a short period of time without having to involve psychologists, assessments, and all that. So this flexibility means that some students can avoid changing school or changing class. So here he's focusing on the benefits of having this flexibility between the anchor class and the special class because the students can go back and forth. And then you can take account of the fact that over a child's school life, some will have more challenges than others, perhaps related to something at home, but it could also be academic challenges or social challenges within the class. Then there's this whole issue of what we're seeing, at least in the Danish society, that children and young people are having more and more mental health issues. And here in the enclosure, there's a way of approaching these kind of target group expansion, I've called it. Torben, he says, the students' problems are becoming more complex, but there aren't enough resources. A floater such as Bjarne is a great benefit for the school. He's a social pedagogue and is continuously working on preventive activities. So the whole idea is that the school has seen that there are different social challenges going on right now. And so what they've done is hired a social pedagogue to help do some of the preventive work as a way of addressing this target group expansion. As I was saying before, the organizational form defines which learning environments are available to whom, and also what kind of differences students meet within the learning environment. If we look at the three different organizational forms and compare them with each other, let's have a look first at the Nest, which is this rather small and a priori a kind of limited learning environment. It's mainly for students with autism, and the idea when we talked to teachers and the principals, they said, well, it should be students that fit well with this need for a more quiet and more protected environment, basically. But that also means that the students that are in those classes, they don't see more outward going activity or students that are maybe more explosive in their way of being. And so that means that you are deciding that these students will have a relatively limited learning environment. If we compare with the enclosure at the bottom of the slide, well, here the approach was, well, there are the students that there are, and when we have this grade level learning, differences are the outset. And as I said before, you have students here with ADHD and autism and anxiety problems and all sorts of different problems. And that's the value behind that organizational forms. So the students that are there will see a whole lot of variation in children their age. And then in the middle, you have the sluice, which is focusing on this exchange. So you have these possibility for some students to have this exchange between, on the one hand, a large and more ordinary learning environment, and on the other hand, you have this more protected environment. But on the other hand, what we've also seen is that it can also be quite challenging. We had an example of a student called Julie who had some problems in her home where the mother had alcohol problems. And so for a period of time, she was primarily in the special class. But the thing is that to maintain the connection and the sense of belonging with the anchor class and her friendships there, she had this individual schedule, but she was asked to shift back and forth. Within a single day, she could have like 2 lessons in the anchor class and the rest of the day in the special class. So in a sense, it's actually quite demanding of a child who is already having some problems to be able to switch between a class with maybe 26 students and at other times maybe 5 or 8 students. This is at least something that we think is worth reflecting upon. And this whole idea of how different should we have students within a given learning environment. And this whole idea of what is it we mean and what are the values behind inclusion. Here's Jesper, who's a pedagogue in the Nest, which is the small environment. He says, I would say that focus should be on autism because there is a lot of variation within the spectrum already. It's difficult to have students with behavioral problems, neglect, and sensitivity. A kid like Otto, who can be noisy and explosive in his behavior, can easily provoke a careful Asperger or autist. So he's focusing on that we should actually be more aware of what's best for the students with autism and make sure that the environment is as uniform as possible. On the other hand, at the other end of the scale, we have the enclosure where a pedagogue, Lisa, she says, well, the students will be part of society later anyway, where they must try to function like ordinary people. They will learn this best by being together with others that are normal, in quotation, if one can use that term at all. So her view here is that children should be exposed to all the diversity that are among students. And so this is just an illustration of how different approaches to inclusion can look like from the point of view of these two pedagogues. And of course, with all inclusion, it's a matter of some very difficult balancing acts. So let me share with you some approaches or some reflections that some of the teachers have had. Here's a teacher in the Sluice where you have this moving back and forth. What he says is that what we really need are completely clear guidelines for what these special classes can in fact accommodate. And he says this in spite of being in an organization where the whole idea is that you're supposed to be able to change back and forth. But we have to respect that he feels that he needs some kind of guideline to be able to understand why is it that some students are placed here and how can we work with them. Then there are some that talk about limits to inclusion. And of course, there always will be some. But here is an example of a quotation from the Nest, where it's supposed to be a relatively small, at least when they start, quite uniform group of students. She says, in my opinion, 5Y, which is the 5th grade, has too many challenged students. Apart from the 4 SEND students, there are 7 or 8 kids who have already had special provisions involving parents, psychologists, students counseling sessions. It has been really tough. And we've had 2 SEND students that had left the school. One of them had many autism symptoms, and she was transferred to another school that provides for autists because it was too much for her here. So the point is here, back to my other point, that one thing is you start off in the 1st grade with a relatively homogeneous group of students, but along the way, many of these students will have additional challenges. And how do you adjust your organization? And also, as we heard earlier, continuously to have focus on the competencies of the teachers. And Dr. Khatri was talking about maybe we should be obliged to continue to have some extra additional education, even for teachers that are in service, because maybe this is a reflection of the fact that the teachers here are not well equipped to be able to adjust to the challenges that will show up. And then, of course, there's this talk about the gray zone. Here's a teacher from the enclosure. She says, one of the big advantages of working at the grade level, so where we had the 2 classes together rather than having the ordinary classes, is that you don't distinguish that much between the SEND kids and the ordinary kids. When you have them all together and receive additional resources, then you have lots of possibilities. There are so many kids in the gray zone between what you could call ordinary students and included students. So what she's talking about here is this benefit of you do get the extra resources because it's connected to what individual students needs, but you have, if you've got the teachers together and a pedagogue with special education competencies, you have the flexibility to work together to address all the students' needs, not only the ones with SEN and the additional resources, but the entire group of students. And I'll just share with you a few of the reflections from parents and students. From the enclosure, there's the general experience. Here's one foster mother of one of the students there. She says, the teachers in the enclosure do really insist on there being room for everyone here. And there really is room for everyone's differences. I find that all the kids are really tolerant of one another. And this is what the aim is, to learn, to teach students to actually tolerate one another's differences. On the other hand, we have the sluice, where we have this quite different structure, where you have the special class and the general class. Here's a mother of one of the students with general learning disabilities. She says, I understand the idea behind inclusion, but I must say that it's not for his sake, her son, that he's included. It's because someone else has decided that it's a good idea based on some completely different principles. It's not my child's needs. He would feel much more safe knowing that he belongs to a special class. And this is based on some really very challenging experiences that her son has had. I'll give an example a little bit later in my presentation, where it's very difficult for a child who has learning disabilities, but also has a very difficult time social skills wise. And so this is based on many really hurtful experiences that her child has been through, where her kind of reasoning is that, well, he would be much better off if he could just stay in a more secluded special education setting. And then there's this vulnerability in terms of the sense of belonging, because when we talk about inclusion, what we want to do is not just aim for students being physically included, but we also want those students to feel that they belong to this setting. And here's a student in the 5th grade in the sleuths, where they have this possibility of changing back and forth. She says, after I've started in the special class, no one from the anchor class talks to me anymore. So this is one of those heartbreaking statements that makes you very aware that it can be very sensitive and very vulnerable to have to ask a child to both feel belong, to be part of one of these more larger settings, but also one of the small special settings. Where do I belong? Where do I feel I belong? The second main finding is not really interesting in itself, but on the other hand, it needs to be repeated. The main finding number 2 is that high quality instruction is what provides possibilities for inclusive participation. What we find is basically that inclusive participation is supported when there is well-functioning and well-structured interdisciplinary collaboration, and the classroom management is effective, and there is clear and continuous support by the management. And these are things that we can say, we already know that, but it's really important to continue to say these things. And I'll try and illustrate here. First of all, what is it we want to do with our inclusive environments, learning environments? It is to enable all students, both with special education needs and others, to participate in these environments. What we see is that when we have teachers with general education backgrounds, and in this case, pedagogues with special education background, when they share the responsibility for all students, and when they take an interdisciplinary perspective on all students, this enables both a holistic view on each individual child, which is given better inclusion or better participation of possibilities of a participation, but also that gives them a better and more holistic view on the whole class, which then generates this sense of cohesion and also an acceptance of differences. Interdisciplinary collaboration is also one way where the teachers, and if there are pedagogues, that they can actually develop their own competencies in terms of special knowledge. And also they can exchange experiences with one another. And here's an example of a teacher who states that, then I started working at this school and it was fantastic. The pedagogue Lisa participated in all lessons and I could pick up 200 tips on how to work with these children. I could draw upon the entire professionalism that pedagogues contribute with. It's simply a goldmine. And this, to understand this citation, it's important to say again that in Denmark, a typical class is taught by a teacher with knowledge about the subject knowledge primarily. And during the reform from 2014, we actually got pedagogues that have a different education into the schools, in the ordinary schools. And here's an example of how pedagogues and teachers can actually work together and also lift the quality of the teaching that takes place. Then there's the point about effective classroom management. What this does is it also enables to accommodate both the individual needs, but also taking a view of the needs of the class as a whole, because it's this balancing act we have to succeed with. As we heard before, classroom management, of course, creates this structure and a more orderly setting for the teaching, but it also is a way to create a sense of belonging and a pleasant working environment where there's a focus on learning activities. And one of the things that we see is that it's very important when you're talking about inclusion, especially in settings when there are different types of students. Some are more quiet and need small areas where they can sit by themselves, work individually or in pairs, or they need to have a break from the teaching and go out for a while and do some physical activity. And then you can also have some underlying clear procedures and routines. Some of those rules and routines will be effective for the whole class, but you also need to have some individual specific routines and rules. And the whole idea is to make it clear, why is it that some students have some rules while others have others? Because it's a way of actually making a welcoming and a very predictive environment for the class. But it's not only in the classroom setting that you need these rules. If I can give you an example from the Nest, where the whole idea is that all students should be able to play and work with each other. And there was a student called Josephine who was quite quiet, and she needed a very quiet and small learning environment. And the mother said that it's important for her to be able to choose who she plays with in the recess, so outside of the lessons, because she said that, this was the term she used, integration should take place within the classroom setting, but in the recess time, she should be able to choose who she plays with. But the pedagogue and the teacher said, well, that's not the way we work here. We work here, everyone has to be able to learn to play with each other also outside of the lessons. And that's why sometimes when they're in the first grade, they have decided, the teachers and the pedagogue, who should play with who during some of the recess breaks. And this is, of course, because Josephine, in this case, she was supposed to play with Jamil, and Jamil has difficulty in social skills, and she has to be able to learn how to play with other children, and she only learns that if she's given that opportunity. And on the other hand, Josephine will also learn to be accommodating of others who are not like her. So this is an example of how classroom management and those rules and routines and the whole value system behind inclusion also goes all the way out into what happens in the recess time, not only in the lessons. What happens when a school doesn't have these fixed ideas of how things should be done? This is a citation from Charlotte, who's a pedagogue in the Sluice. She says, I've never been at a school where so many students just bolt in and out of the classroom as they please. It seems as if it's become part of the culture here, but I won't accept it in my lessons. I mean, it's all right that sometimes things are difficult, but then you can sit underneath your table and then sit back up again when you're ready, but you don't just leave the room. This is something we should talk some more about at this school, she says. And this is especially in the Sluice, where children are expected to be able to go from the one class to the other. Then it's even more important that the teachers in each of the classes have the same rules, so that the students that are going back and forth actually recognize what is expected of me here. It should be what is also expected of me there. The final point is about school management and the support of school management. That is what ensures that these visions we have about inclusion can actually materialize in praxis. What is really important is to have a continuous focus on the vision and the values behind inclusion. Because as I talked about previously, some of the parents will question the whole idea and the values behind inclusion when it comes to what it means for my child in practice. So it's really important that the teachers know that they have the school management behind them in these difficult situations in every day. When the school leaders do take responsibility with common pedagogical principles of the school, it makes it easier to achieve the goals in practice. Let me give you an example. The SLUIS, there was the second grade classes, the special class and the general class. They were going on a school trip, a field trip, where they needed to take a bus. And unfortunately, the bus didn't have enough spaces, enough seats for all the children. There were 4 children that would have to go in a car. And so the pedagogue asked the leader if they could borrow the car for the 4 SEND students that were at the time in the special class. And the school manager, the school principal has to say, of course, yes, of course you can borrow a car, but it's not only for the 4 SEND students. It has to be a mix of students, because this is the whole idea of our daily instruction and teaching, and also, of course, on a school trip. And so this is a very small but very important way to support the teachers to be able to insist on how things should be done in everyday teaching. Another thing is that the resources that are prioritized, it has to be made clear so that the whole staff understands why resources are being prioritized as they are. If we take the NEST form example, it's a school where you have some classes that are NEST classes and the other classes are ordinary classes. And the thing with the NEST classes is that there has to be 2 adults all the time, a teacher and a pedagogue at least, at all times. Even when one of the teachers is sick and you need a substitute, there has to be a substitute, so they are 2. And if the school management doesn't explain this very clearly to the other staff can express, why is it that, just for a couple of hours, why can't they just be 1? But there are some reasons why for these classes with those special needs, it's important that there are 2 resources available. So important to explain the use and prioritization of resources. And also a final thing is what we've also heard from Dr. Khatri is about the dedicating of time and resources so that teachers and pedagogues can actually sit down and prepare and implement and also evaluate their joint instruction together. It's really important to learn from the mistakes and things that are challenging underway. And just to follow up on the example with this school trip where the 2nd graders went on this school trip together, the 2 classes, well, one of the tasks was to bake pancakes. And so this very challenged boy, where the mother said, it's not for my child's sake that he's included, well, he was supposed to engage in a group setting, maybe 6 or 8 students together. And this was just too difficult for him. And so he started screaming and shouting and everything. And then he spills all the pancake batter. And so neither he nor his group made pancakes that day. And of course, I can't know whether there was enough teachers and pedagogues on that trip, but it's just a little illustration of where is it these frustrations from the child's perspective and the parent's perspective of when does it go wrong. And maybe if there had been enough resources along, then it would have been avoided so that this child could get a good experience in a setting that was very uncomfortable and not very common for him, because he has most of his lessons in a very different type of setting. So this is another example of thinking the dedication of resources all the way through the school activities. So this is what I would like to share with you from our analysis. And I'd like to just finally give you a few ideas of or some indications of where we are in terms of challenges in Denmark. As I mentioned earlier, we're in a situation where we're seeing more and more students that are pressured in terms of mental health and well-being, and we're struggling to find out why are we in that situation and what can be done. We have a general lack of qualified teachers. Unfortunately, we're not in the situation like Finland where where the teacher education is very attractive. So we're in a pressure where lots of young people don't choose to become a teacher. And more specifically, we are in lack of teachers and pedagogues with special educational knowledge and experience. And here I think there is something to be thought about in terms of whether we should make it mandatory to actually have extra education there for people who are in service. And we also see that the support system is also under pressure. We have a support system called the pedagogical psychological counseling. And this counseling system is being pulled at in several different ways. There's an increasing demand to tackle individual issues and sometimes also give treatment in terms of addressing anxiety or eating disorders. And also, they are also expected to work more preventively and become more active and physically help out in the classroom and give good advice to teachers. So this is a challenge that we're facing right now. But even though I've given you 3 examples of how alternative approaches to inclusive education can take form, it's of course no silver bullet. As I stated out with my second main findings, what we cannot avoid is focusing continuously on high quality instruction, qualified staff, and very supportive leadership. It's really important to create these inclusive learning environments, irrespective of which organizational form you have chosen. Thanks for your attention.
Mongetak, Ms. Chantal, interesting analysis of inclusive learning environments and special education support in Denmark. It's also very great to hear that we're also starting to use more and more data analysis in decision making. Of course, I want to remind for those who are watching us, yes, the minister. Yes, yes. You want to ask right now? Yeah, okay. Okay, I just want to remind for those who are watching us live right in here, you can recap everything in the YouTube channel because on the National Agency for Education. So, all right, the next lecture is advisor to the ministry, Ignas Gaižiūnas, who will be presenting upcoming reforms in Lithuanian educational system concerning inclusive education. And Mr. Ignas, the stage is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me clearly. First of all, I want to thank previous speakers for sharing your experiences and for sharing your knowledge. And I would also like to welcome everyone here to this conference. It is a pleasure to be here. It's an honor to be here, and it's an exciting opportunity to speak for you about current situation in Lithuania regarding special education needs and regarding the reforms and changes we are planning. I think I have a very good opportunity as being the third one to speak, as I can reflect upon what's already been said in the first 2 presentations, and to comment and to see whether we are actually going forward in the direction our countries are going as well. And it's actually interesting to see that some challenges which are currently in the Denmark and Finland are also present in Lithuania. So without further ado, I will start my presentation. And whenever I am speaking about inclusion and I'm speaking publicly, I always start from this slide. It's a vision of inclusion because it's very easy to get lost in thinking of what is important and what we actually have to achieve. And the vision for inclusion, and it is my personal vision. It is not written on any document, but it is what we should provide the best opportunities for children to grow and learn together by strengthening and empowering everyone. And I think this is the thing we should struggle for. This is the way we should move forward. And it is this idea I think we could all get behind when working towards inclusion and finding the best ways to provide environment in which children could learn and grow together, not being separated despite anything. Because I do agree with what was said in the first presentation, that inclusion is a value, and every children is a value, despite any qualities that child might have. Might it be tall or short, plump or slim, brunette or blonde, sick or healthy, with special education needs or without special education needs. Every single child is a value, and every single child needs to be looked after, and every single child needs to have opportunities to grow and learn. And I think this is the core idea which should we pursue. Okay. A bit of the context and a bit of the documents. It's going to be a short slide, but in the 2020, the last year of the previous parliament session, we had amendments to our law on education, which stipulates that every school starting from 2024 have to be able to accept any child despite his or her special education needs. Up until now, and still today, we have a possibility for schools to reject a particular child on the grounds that the school is not prepared to provide education to this child. And I think this is a huge shift which was made by our parliament, a huge shift in the mindset we must pursue. But every school should be open to every child, and it is a challenge and it's a difficulty, but we must work on. Also, in regards to this change to our law on during last year, we created an action plan to pursue this change in the our law, and we set out a specific tasks and specific measures which would help the schools to be more prepared for the opening of the doors to every child. Okay, this is a very long and difficult name. It's full and bureaucratic name, but for short, I call it an inclusion plan. And on this inclusion plan, currently we are developing educational development program progress measure, which is called Implement Inclusive Education, and it's mostly where all the finances are being set in order to reach specific goals set out in this action plan for inclusive education. And maybe an important thing to mention, maybe previous presentations were more holistic and more about the ideas, but as an advisor to the minister and a representative of the minister, I cannot leave out the financial things, and I will talk about them further. We have more than 100 million euros planned for the year 23 and 29, which should be dedicated to pursuing progress in the inclusion education. Out of this, already 6.2 million should be in next year, and about 15 million in year 2024. And the important thing also to stress is that the inclusion is not it is not a certain point in space and time which we can reach. It's not a finish line we can cross and say, oh, that's it. We can lay down our weapons. We can sit down and relax now. Inclusion is an ongoing process, and it is a process which, in my opinion, doesn't have an end. And I think previous presentations show that, but despite being on a long way, our countries as well are still working on developing their inclusion vision and still working on improving their system. So I think this is the same going to be with us in Lithuania. 2024 is not a magical point, and after this year, the work will not be done. and the work will be forever as long as we are going to teach children, because every children is going to be different. Every children is going to have different needs, which we will have to address while educating them. About a little bit about a little of statistics. We have a national progress plan, and just similarly as in the Denmark, we have an aim of 85% of pupils with disabilities to be educated in an inclusive way by 2025 and 90% by 2030. And I think this is one of the points for the discussion. Whether these numbers are the thing we should actually concentrate on, and I think our Danish colleagues will have insight on this topic. But it is what it is. It is a plan which was made in 2020, and I have to talk about it. Currently, we have about 71,000 or 15% out of the total number of students who have special education needs. Just a few years ago, in 2018, we had 68,000 of these students, which constituted to the 15%. We do see a slight increase every year in special education needs being indicated. Okay, but it is a topic also maybe for a discussion why this number is increasing. Is it whether actually the number of students with special education needs increases, or whether it is what we learned to recognize these needs better. And also we have around 10,000 students who have disabilities. It's about 2% of these students, and this number is rather stable throughout the years. And important thing to mention, but about 90% of the students with special education needs and about 50% of students with disabilities are already in mainstream classes. The number for the students with special education needs are rather high, but it is rather high because a lot of students with very low level of special education need support in the mainstream classes. We also have about 3% of the students with special education needs and 14% of students with disabilities who are educated in special classes in the mainstream schools. These students are still segregated in special classes, but they are in the mainstream school. They are using the same entrance, the same corridors, the same cafeteria, the same gym. And at least these students have a little bit more of the possibilities to interact with other children, but it is not also an ideal way to operate. And about 7.6% of the people with the special education needs and about 1/3 of the students with disabilities were educated in separate special schools, which are separate buildings with separate teaching staff. And these students have a very little interaction actually with other students. It is most of the interaction is on the certain occasions like holidays or celebrations and things like that. And these students do not have a constant and periodical way to be with other students and to learn with other students. Also, the topic which is important in Lithuania, and we talk about it a lot in Lithuania, is the educational support specialists who are present in our country. A number is rising steadily but slowly. And we do see a huge shortage of psychologists at our schools. We also see a shortage of social pedagogues and some of the speech therapists who could provide an additional support to the teachers while they're teaching students with special education needs. Also, we have, on the other hand, we have a huge number of teacher assistants, and the number is increasing. Last year, we had the biggest increase in the history, and it increased by about 700 people who work across the country as teacher assistants and are able to provide additional support to teacher and student while we are learning in the mainstream class. Also important thing to stress is the school readiness for inclusive education. a figure which is rather sad, but it is what it is, and we have to strive to work on this figure as well. But it is only 7 out of all our schools in Lithuania in year 2021 had a physical environment fully accessible for people with disabilities. Of course, a lot of schools have a partial accessibility, but we do have a set of criteria in which we measure this accessibility of the schools, and only handful of those are accessible. About 8% of the schools have no educational support specialist, neither a special pedagogue, neither psychologist, speech therapist, or social pedagogue. And 2/3 of the primary schools have incomplete teams of educational support specialists. So the numbers are not that optimistic. And actually, they reflect the previous slide, which I showed you about the numbers of the educational support specialists. We do need more people coming into schools, also not also in the teacher positions, which are also very important, but also to the educational support specialists. Talking about the funding, I think we as a country made a rather huge leap in the last few years, because the amount in the last 2 years increased by about 30%, by 1/3, from 60 million to 86 million. Also, the sum for the educational support per student increased as well. And here is a short graph of every municipality and its spending on this educational support. I will not go into detail on this graph, but the thing I want to stress here, but we have huge differences between municipalities. Let's say the average money spent per student on special education support in Neringa is 3 times lower than it is in Šalčininkai. However, it is a very interesting phenomena. But if we would look at a similar graph, which would show the percentage of the students who are taught in the mainstream classes, who are included in the mainstream classes, we would see actually a reverse graph. The municipality of Neringa has one of the highest percent of students in the mainstream classes. On the other hand, Šalčininkai municipality has one of the lowest percentage of students in the mainstream classes. And it does connect to some extent to the previous presentation, where there was said that actually we spend a lot of money on exclusion. We are spending our money to exclude students from each other, and this is a thing we need to address, and it's a thing we need to work on. Also, I would like to show current system for pedagogical psychological support, which is present in Lithuania. We have 3 levels support: the national level, where we have 3 national institutions. So it's National Education Agency, which is here, where we are sitting, those who are here physically. We also have a Lithuanian Education Center for Blind and Visually Impaired, which works as a school, also provides support for the schools who have students with blindness or visual impairments. Also, this center has a special unit which works on the students who have autism and other similar impairments, and also provides support to the schools. And closely, we have a Lithuanian Center for Education of Deaf and Hard of Hearing, so similar center to the ones for who have blindness and visual impairments, but only on hearing issues. On municipal level, we have educational psychological services or educational support services. The name varies from municipality to municipality, and actually this is, as far as I remember, these services, which are pedagogical psychological services, were created in Lithuania in the image of the Danish system. And also it is interesting to see how they moved in this last 2 2 decades and the difference and the similarities between these support services, as we do see the same challenge in our support services. But on the one hand, we want to have them evaluating the needs for the students very well and providing the recommendations for the school which could be worked on. And on the other hand, we do expect that these services would do a lot of prevention work, a lot of work instead of the school and things like that. And on the school level, we have different types of schools. I will not go over all of them, but basically we have general schools and schools with special classes and several types of special schools. And what is our near-term outlook and what do we wish to see? Starting the year 2023, we see the establishment of the Lithuanian Center for the Inclusion in Education, a center which would work in the inclusion topic of all the special education needs. Currently, we have mostly for the blind, for the visual impairments, hearing impairments, and the autism. But we do see the need to work in our areas of special education needs, and we do see the center as a place which would bring novelties, which would bring new methods, new methodologies into Lithuania, adapt these methodologies by working with the real students and providing these ideas on how the inclusion could be reached in the school throughout the country. Second thing we see is the establishment of the regional consultation centers. We do see that the main work actually has to be done by the teachers, but it is important that we would provide the support for the teachers as well. And we do see these regional consultation centers as a places which would provide on-ground support in particular schools. Every center would have a certain region allocated to this center, and the center would have to consultate all of the schools in this particular region by going to the school, sitting in the class, discussing with the teacher on how he or she could improve these methods, watching a child in his real environment, and working with the school by providing opportunities for school to develop necessary competencies to reflect the special education needs of the child. And also one of the smaller changes, we do have several different units which worked with the children who have emotional or behavioral problems. And we do see these units combining into one national institution which would work on these issues and provide support to the schools. Also, I think it is important to see and to structurally see how the support should work for a particular student. I saw a similar diagram in the first presentation. My diagram actually is inverted pyramid, but I think it is similar. But the important thing is to say that the school is responsible for the provision of educational support to the child and his or her education. However, we strive to provide support possibilities for the schools, but the school and the teachers are the main people who has to be responsible for the education of the child. And important that in all of the phases, parents should be involved, and it was already mentioned that parents and working with the family is a crucial part of the working with the students who have special education needs. So the first level is a teacher who changes his or her methods in order to adhere to the child's educational needs, and this might be even small changes, and we as a teachers actually do it all the time. However, whenever teacher sees that some things are already out of his or her hands, the entire school entire team of schools, educational support specialists and teachers should work on a plan on how to reflect the child's needs. And this is already a next level when entire school and a team of the school kicks in. And here is a very important thing is to work on teamwork and cooperation between different teachers and different disciplines, which was already mentioned actually in the previous presentations. The next step, whenever school sees that maybe additional support is needed, the child has to be evaluated by the educational psychological services, which would provide a comprehensive evaluation with the recommendations on how schools should change education and environment of the particular child in order to adhere to the child needs. After that, if there is the need of additional help, we see here coming in these new regional consultation centers, when people from the consultation centers would come to the school and help the school the school to work with the recommendations and to find the perfect, maybe not a perfect, but the best possible solution for the child. And here we see some of the work being taken off from these educational psychological services, and they should mostly concentrate on evaluation, while consultation part should be done by regional centers, which should also work as schools. So basically in these centers, we will have a school, special education school, where people are part-time working as teacher and part-time going on as consultants for other schools. And the last step, we have Lithuania, we have Center for Inclusion and other national institutions which might provide additional support. In some cases, whenever it is needed, child could go to these national centers, whether it is maybe to learn some basics of sign language if that child needs that, or to work with a special apparatus to write for blind people and things like that. So basically, this is the algorithm we see, and I would also hope to see a discussion on this algorithm. Sadly, I am not a part of the discussion, but this is why I am raising the points for the discussion to be talked about. How we see the work at school being changed, and the first thing we want to stress is that there should be a positive attitude towards diversity of the students, and the diversity should be a value. And this is a tricky thing, and I think that this conference is part of one of the specific actions we are doing towards changing the mindset. And I want to thank that all of the principals and the teachers are here present and listening to this conference, and maybe getting some of the ideas to work on in their own schools. Also, as I mentioned before, the teamwork and the close cooperation between different specialists have to be one of the core ideas of the work at school. We still have a lot of lone wolf action, that teacher teaches alone, he knows the best, and he does not allow other specialists or other teachers into the class. We still have a lot of teachers who are afraid to discuss what to do better and how to do better, but we need to work on this and improve this. Third and very important thing, and I actually was fascinated, amazed, and inspired by a last presentation, because this is the thing actually we want to reach. In order, we want to maximize the implementation of education program in peer groups. We don't want students to be separated whenever it is possible for them to not be separated. And I also even taken a photo of the first presentation where you showed on how much of the percentage of the curricula is being implemented together. And I think this is one of the issue which should be reflected, and I would like to see it reflected in the discussion as well, on how to reach this as much as possible amount of time of students being together, learning together, and growing together. What we also see is that not only classroom assistants, but educational support specialists should be in the classrooms. Today, we see a lot of educational support specialists taking the child out of the class in their own cabinets, working with them one-on-one. We don't say that it is not, but it should be forgotten, this way of work, but we say that it should be a mix. Educational support specialists should also go more into the class, watching child in this natural environment, helping child to work in this natural environment, also one-on-one work could be present, but it should not be main mode of operation. With what we also want to see is the adapting the curriculum, drawing up an individual education assistance plan, and we want to work on it much more. Currently, we also see that it's more about box ticking of what you're going to do, less about what actually needs to be done in the classrooms. There are very different ways in how schools operate. I'm not saying about this. I'm not saying this about all the schools, but we do see a lot of this. Also, improving involvement of the parents or guardians in the education process. The thing is that we need to create a certain rules which should be followed not also in the class and at home as well, especially for those who have autism and the special need for order. Important thing we are working on is developing universal design for education guidelines, and we do see them being applied in the schools. And out of these universal design slides, we want more of adapting and structuring the environment to meet the needs of the student, not the other way around. We still think that the student needs to adapt to the environment, not that the environment actually needs to adapt to the student. And this also should change. And last thing, what we see, that we should work on decentralized provision for special education and technical assistance equipment. Up until now, and still this year, we are going to do it for the last time. And we are buying this special equipment on the national level and then distributing them to the schools. What we see, that school could see better what particular equipment that particular school or municipality sees, and we should work on, we should go forward on decentralizing the procurement of this equipment which is needed for the education. Also, some measures to increase number of the education support specialists. I will not spend a lot of time on this, but this is also a very important thing, not the only thing. A lot of emphasis should be also put on improving competences of every teacher, but we do think that if we have more of this specially trained people in the schools working in teams with teacher, we could also achieve better results. So we have an increase of the salaries, we have improved study conditions with a special scholarship for those who have chosen programs in special education, speech therapy, surdopedagogy, or tiflopedagogy. We also have increased number of seats available to in the study program. Basically, everyone who would meet the requirements and would want to study in these programs would be accepted. A very interesting measure, which I would like to share a lot, especially with the principals. What we this year, first time in history, we had special study programs to acquire competencies of educational support specialists. We have 250 places in special education, speech therapy, tiflopedagogy, and surdopedagogy. This actually received a lot of attention, and a lot of teachers wanted to participate in the study programs. And we do see that this is as a winning strategy for the schools. When the school is, if the school is actually lacking educational support specialists, it could send its own teacher to acquire special competences in this area, and to have a teacher and a special education, and educational support specialist, which would work in many ways to provide enough of the contact hours for the teachers. Also, teacher would again need additional competences which would allow him or her to participate in the class and work with the students in other ways it didn't do before. And in year 23 and 24, we are planning at least the same amount of study places. So I would urge principals to talk about this possibility with their teachers, and to support teachers who would like to participate in these study programs and learn additional competences. We are planning to increase this number of spaces, but it is we have to discuss it with the universities who are almost at their capacity. Also, additional funding, which is being spent, which is being given every year, and the figure I showed you, but in the last 2 years it increased a lot, but we also giving an additional increases. However, it is very difficult since we have a very interesting situation where the educational support is a autonomous competence of municipalities, while the education is being a delegated competence of municipalities, and municipalities have to provide all the necessary financial support for the educational support. However, national government seeing that municipalities are not always allocating enough funds for educational support, have to allocate national funds in order to cover up the holes left by municipalities. And actually it is not enough, and we in a sort of limbo where two bodies have to fund one function, and probably this is why educational support is not working that well in Lithuania. And the last 2 slides is just to show the timeline for the year 22 and 23 out of this, let's say, philosophical picture of how school should work, what we see being done in this next academic year, September, which is already at the end, but we already did this. We see the recommendations for the implementation of the updated curricula for the co-education of children with special education needs being developed, and these recommendations are already developed, already published in the National Education Agency website. You could see them, and they should provide teachers with additional ideas on how to work with students who have particular needs. We also see some changes in the law of education in this autumn, mostly concentrated on changing the description of social pedagogy, mostly more empowering pedagogical, psychological services on assessing children. In the October, we are going to start the discussions with the municipalities on how educational support should be funded, and it's a really important thing on what is the proportion and ratio which is being done by government and which is being done by municipality in order to actually cover all of the needs for the students in the municipalities. In the December, we see the updated description of the procedures for provision of pedagogical and psychological support, and these documents are already prepared. They're just being revised currently, and we would see there that much more of the teamwork must be present in the school, and the educational support specialists should work in teamwork with the other teachers in order to provide support necessary for the students. In December of the same year, what we want to see is a model for the inclusive classes groups developed. The name, I think, is bad, but currently we don't have a better name. And what we would like to see here is what we saw in the last presentation, actually, I think. Several suggestions on what models could be used in the schools in order to accommodate the needs of the children. We have a group working on it, but I think we will, after seeing this presentation, we will call for some backup because actually schools could really use this kind of models and in order to develop a way for the children to be included. As we see, there are a lot of challenges for each of the model. There are also a lot of advantages for each of the model, but advantages could be used and challenges can be overcome. But we do see going towards these models because basically what we have today in the schools are mainstream classes, special classes. In some ways there are, but students from the special classes are having more interactions from the students in the mainstream classes, if the special classes in the mainstream school, but otherwise they're largely separated. We do have some models of the SLUs. I saw one model in the Kaunas city of SLUs, but we would need to encourage the schools to think more about how students can be included and how their needs could be reflected and based on different models. I hope you're going to succeed to offer these models. Also in this December, we are going to provide schools with the guidelines for universal design in education. A team of the scientists and practitioners are already working on these guidelines. This Thursday, we are going to have an open consultation. If you want, you can still, I think, register on the ministry website for this consultation on this universal design guidelines. And we think that it's really important that we strive for the education to be for all, not designated for a particular group whenever it is possible. Also, we see in the beginning of the January, the establishment of this new national center for the inclusion. This is going to be a challenge and a difficult task. It's going to start from the scratch, and we'll need to build it up, but the ambition is high, the expectations are high, and we do hope that together with all the community, we would have this education, the Center for the Inclusion running smoothly next year. I don't know what I've done. Okay. Also in the January, we see the end of the selection process for the regional consultation centers. We see them coming from the currently working special schools, but 10 of the currently operating special schools would shift to this regional consultation centers. We also see that we need to change the classification of the special education needs and how children are being identified for this for the special education needs. The group is also already working from the last February. This is a very difficult task, but we do believe that we need to change from the more medical classification, which is now very medical, to the more educational classification, and work more towards not identifying what child cannot do, but more to identifying what he or she can do and providing recommendations for the school to work on that. Also, in the next May, we see the admission to this retraining study programs, the programs I mentioned before. So I hope principals and teachers are listening, and on the next May, we do see the admission to the study programs beginning. June, we see Child Welfare Commission regulations being updated on how these commissions in the schools should work, also entailing all of the things I talked before: universal design, teamwork, inclusive models, and things like that. And things we're still going to do this year, but from the next year we are going to stop doing this, but we are still going to purchase some special education kits with a large kit, and this will be distributed to the schools. But as I mentioned, this is the last year we're going to do this. Starting from the next year, we are going to try to decentralize this. And also the important thing is that throughout the year, there are going to be various various activities for professional development. And here I urge as specialists as well as leaders of the schools to look openly towards these activities and to provide as much possibilities as you can for your specialists and teachers to participate in these activities, because these are really important. We do understand that throughout previous decades, there were not so much of enthusiasm about this topic, and there was not that much of the accent on developing these competences in this area, but we do believe that we can do it now, and we are planning to have different modes of this professional development activities, also visits to the foreign countries, visits to our schools, and actually very practice-oriented activities, not seminars and not talking heads like I am talking like right now. So please be open about this. And this would end my presentation, and I would like also to share one additional idea with you. I think but we have a huge challenge, just as the minister said before, ahead of us. but it is not a challenge we cannot face. It's a challenge we can face, and we will overcome this challenge. The important thing is to always ask, what can I do? What can I as a minister, what can I as a mayor, as an advisor, as a principal, as a specialist of municipality, what can I as a teacher or a parent do in order to create these possibilities for every student to learn, for every student to grow, and to do it together, because every single one of us is important. So if we will have these questions in our hearts, I think we will succeed despite any challenges we might face. Thank you.
Microphone works. So thank you, Mr. Ignas, for your amazing presentation. Let's hope all of your planned reforms will work and succeed. And it's very great to hear the last words that are basically NordEd conference motto, together for better education, right? So, all right, let's continue. And we have last but not least, amazing lecture from Christian Ban Andreas, Danish Ministry of Children and Education, National Agency for Education and Quality, who is giving us lecture online on inclusive education in Denmark, the point of view of the school. So, Christine, are you here?
Yes, I'm here. I'm just trying to make these technical details work.
Okay.
And hopefully you'll see my screen in a minute.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, we see you. All good then.
Okay. I'll just take this off. Okay, you see. Okay, so hi everybody. Greetings from Denmark. It's a cold and rainy day in Denmark. I don't know if it's better in Vilnius. I hope it is. Thank you for the invitation to do this speech. NordEd's aim is to facilitate debate and knowledge sharing in the Nordic country and the Baltic countries. And I'm very fond of having the possibility to contribute to this. My name is Christine Bang Andreasen, and I'm a special advisor in the Danish Ministry for Children and Education. I work at the National Agency for Education and Quality, and the main focus in my daily work is on the quality and quality assessment in primary schools, the primary school system in Denmark, and especially on children with special needs. So this is very interesting for me to be a part of this conference today. And I've been listening to all the speeches up until now, just back from home. Okay. Yes. My speech will do a bit of an overview of inclusive and special needs education in Denmark, and taking this from the current political trends, because you already heard some interesting details from Chantal Poul Nielsen today, and she gave you a very interesting presentation, a little bit more in depth with the examples, almost from the classrooms out there. I'm going to do a bit more overview from the helicopter and the Danish system. So I hope it'll be interesting for you to hear this side of the story as well from Denmark. So I'll start by giving you a brief overview on the political initiatives the last decade. Chantal already gave a brief on this, and I'll put it a little bit more into the depth. Which reforms and which law implementations has had the largest impact on the inclusive education system in Denmark. After that, I'll put up these current trends in the political system and initiatives on, as I see it, on two different tracks. I'll try to paint this picture for you. And this leads me to the main challenges for inclusive education in Denmark. because as you have already heard from Chantal, it's not easy, and I hear you have some of the same difficulties in Finland and in Lithuania as well, and I'll just give some examples from Denmark as well. But I also see some promising trends, so it'll not all be sad stories on challenges. And at least there's room for some questions and remarks if you have this. Okay, so here is an overview, and it's a little bit like the one you saw from Chantal already. We have this the last 10 years on this timeline. In 2012, we have what we call the law of inclusion, and the ambition with this law was to have 96% of all pupils included in the mainstream education. The goal was to be achieved by reduce the number of referrals to segregated special education classes and special education schools. As Chantal already told you, we used to have these very segregated special needs education and mainstream, and they tried to put it more together, if you can say so. The municipalities and schools were giving more flexibility to differentiate the instruction in schools and try to work with children in smaller groups, being able to have children with special needs inside the mainstream schools as well. And then the change also came to how we try to make a definition of what is special needs education and what is mainstream education. And we had this saying that if the children does not need more than 9 hours of special education support, we call it mainstream education. So that was a definition on that one, taking place in 2012. And then in 2014, I think everybody in Denmark working with schools see this year as a quite important year. There was a huge reform on the whole school system this year and the public schools. And we tried to set up some quite ambitious goals on changing the school system in Denmark. Most important, one of the most important things was to reduce the impact of social economic background. As we saw, it was still a huge problem that children coming from a more difficult social economic background didn't do that well in schools as other children. And so all the things we did reform in the system was around this, trying to minimize the gap between the children. And it was also quite important to look at the students' well-being and ensure that all children were challenged so they could learn from wherever they were and do as best as possible. So that was the main things in 2014 reform. And then in 2016, we have a huge inspection going on the inclusion in mainstream schools. And I'll just later on in my speech, I'll take you through some of the points they found in this inspection. I just want to mention as well, in 2020, we had the Ombudsman took a look at the school quality, especially for children in foster care. And he found that there was really a lot to do to improve the foster care children's school system, because they were usually they are divided into special schools, and maybe some of the children need to go into mainstream schools as well. But it's all this focus on the foster care children led to a general focus on how the quality and segregated special school system is. So that's also what's going on right now. There's a huge focus on this in Denmark. Yes? Okay, so as I see it right now, we have two different tracks going on inclusive education, politically speaking, in Denmark. We have what I call track 1 here, trying to include more pupils with special needs in mainstream education. Just like Chantal already showed you, we have all these kinds of intermediate forms between mainstream education and special needs education. What we call mellemformer is one trend right now, trying to do this. And then we have on another track, we really see the difficulties for inclusive education. That's why I made this small lifeline symbol in the top. There's actually no development towards more inclusion if you look at the bare numbers in Denmark the last 5 years. So that's something we are really aware of. Yes, you'll see it here. The numbers you see here on the left side is percentage. So we have around 95% of the pupils in Denmark in primary schools are included in mainstream education. And that gives us about 5% not included or excluded. As you see, there is a small rise in the inclusion from 2011 towards 2016. But then after that, you see a small decline again. So around 5 to 6% of the pupils in Danish primary schools are in segregated special needs education. It can be either in mainstream schools where they have what we call special classes, or we have special schools which are segregated from the mainstream schools. So we would like this to go upwards, right? But now it's not really going in that direction. Okay, so what are the main challenges for inclusive education in Denmark? As I mentioned, I'll bring in some points from a larger evaluation. Chantal Poul-Nielsen also mentioned this evaluation by VIVE, which is our Danish Center for Social Science Research. They made this evaluation starting in 2016, and they just finished it this year. So this evaluation concludes that we see a rise in children diagnosed with autism spectrum disorders, with behavioral disturbances, and with mental disorders. So this is a way to see that maybe it's not only something going on in school, not being able to including children. We also in general see a rise in diagnosis. This evaluation also found out, and when they asked teachers see a rise in pupils with support needs not taken care of. And more teachers see themselves as capable of meeting pupils with special needs, but they need more support from school principals. So this is actually a good sign that that we already talked about this. The competencies from the teachers and the pedagogues is really important. And actually, when VIVE was asking the teachers, they see more of them see themselves as capable of meeting the pupils. So that's a good sign. But they also claim that they need more support from their leaders. And teachers and principals see the involvement of parents as difficult. We also already heard this. Inges just said in his speech that the involvement of parents is crucial. It is difficult, and especially when we have with children with special needs, this could be a very important step to take to strengthen this involvement of parents. And then they see that schools see a potential improving the pedagogical, psychological support from the municipality. So in Denmark, we have this, Chantal also mentioned this, we have these quite strong municipalities, and they have to support the schools with these pedagogical and psychological support. But they are very busy, and we have research showing that sometimes it takes several years to get the right support for the children. So this is really a place where we're looking at right now to see if we can do something to strengthen this system. Yes. Okay. So the VIVE evaluation also put up the big why. Why do we see those challenges in Denmark? And here comes some of the hypotheses. So it's not the answers, but it could be the answers, which we're still looking for the answers. And the answers might both be related to schools and the school systems, how they work, but also the political trends and in society as such. So one of the theses is that the mainstream schools has not yet succeeded in including pupils with special needs. That's obvious, could be the thing here. But is this the answer? It might be connected to a lack of resources, of course. For example, lack of teachers and pedagogues with special educational skills and knowledge. Another hypothesis is that more pupils are identified with having special needs and are giving extra support. And that was what I just showed you. In general, we have more pupils having these diagnosis. That's also the next point. It's a societal tendency that more children and youth are diagnosed within the psychiatric area. And if you look upon that, you can ask, is that a good thing? Because it could be a sign of us now being able to identify pupils with these problems, and then having the possibilities to support them. But it could also be a sign of schools being less successful in supporting the children and looking for the answers how to support them. Yeah. Okay. And still, we do not have all the answers, but as you can see, the responsibility can be placed on various actors within the welfare society. And we do see also some promising trends if we look at the system in Denmark and from the political point of view. Because one point, the first point here is that special education training is back on the teachers' education as mandatory. That's something has been a big fight the last couple of years. A recent reform on the teachers' education made special education a mandatory part of the education for all teachers. So not only as a subject you can choose as a part of the teachers' education, but mandatory for every teacher. This might be some kind of realization that it takes something to include more pupils in mainstream classroom. But of course, this will take a while until we see these well-educated teachers and pedagogues in the classrooms. But still, there's a hope that things will be better and they will be more qualified. Also, dot 2 here we see there's generally more focus on quality and quality assessment in segregated special needs education. So that is the focus is from a political point of view, but also in society in general. And recent political agreements are assuring quality in segregated special needs education. There has been a massive focus on this from our minister. And as I told you earlier on, the focus maybe started among or regarding the foster children, children in foster care. And then it came out in the rest of the system to look at this special needs education. And with a huge focus on what is quality and the big question mark, what is quality in these special needs education? And can we measure and do the assessment on quality in special needs education the same way we do it in the mainstream education, that is looking at how's the grades in school, how are the test results and stuff like that. It's a little bit more difficult to look at the special needs education with the data on these kind of things. So that is a huge focus right now, and how to benchmark the schools with special needs education when not having the same kind of data, because not all children in segregated special needs education do the exams and do the tests, because they're not able to, for obvious reasons. So yeah, that is a big focus point politically right now. And then finally, as also Chantal also mentioned earlier on, there's a lot of focus on how to make better cooperation or intermediate forms between mainstream education and special needs education, what we in Denmark call mellemformer, but also this co-teaching where you put I think some of the other speeches was talking about this one teacher having to decide everything in his classroom. We try to go a little bit away from that way of seeing things and try to do a lot of cooperation, teamwork amongst teachers, and also teachers and pedagogues coming into the classroom at the same time, doing what they do best, and then doing the education much better for the children with special needs. So that's also an example of a promising trend, as I see it, for a strengthened system regarding this inclusive education. So all in all, there's still some promising trends in the strengthening of the system, as long as we have the focus on the pupils and their need of support to succeed. And just to sum up, we don't want the world to look like this. We have the teacher here saying, the competition needs to be fair. You'll all get the same challenge. Climb that treetop. So this is not inclusive education, and as some of the other speeches said already, there needs to be a change of mindset. Inclusion is a value, and it's very important to look at who are the learners and what are the variety of the learners, and how do we meet them the best way we can do that. So that's all from Denmark right now. Thank you for listening.
And here is the sound. So does anybody have any questions for our lecture or other lecturers? No questions? Okay. So yet again, thank you, Kristin, for amazing presentation. And after that, after these amazing lectures, I'm going to say goodbye to our watchers online. I hope you enjoyed these lectures and going to bring something home and learn and use the knowledge you got from this conference. So I'm saying goodbye to the viewers online. And as I said, goodbye to